Welcome to the channel, or welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to talk about builds for the Epic Raid Contest mode of Desert Perpetual Day 1. So, real quick, I was, of course, going to put examples of what we're going to talk about for builds for each class, except Bungie decided to do maintenance the morning of the raid. And unfortunately, I couldn't record prior to that, so my apologies for lack of visuals, but at least they're adding a new encounters to the raid, right? I'm gonna die on that hill and say there's gonna be a new encounter. Anyway, so I'm gonna try to fill the gaps with images and whatnot of the things that I'm talking about and talk about stats and all of that. So let's get started. I'm gonna start with what I'm gonna plan to bring into the raid, which is going to be Titan. First, let's mention the stats, and this is going to be identical basically for Titan and Hunter. You're gonna want to go into each encounter with high stats in both super and weapons. Then you spread around wherever you have left in the other stats, depending on how you prefer to play. Ideally, you're going to want to have 150 super, and then put 3 super font mods in your helmet. That way you reach 200 for your damage supers, and then the rest would go into weapons as high as you can for extra weapon damage. Warlocks are a little different since you're going to be shackled to well most of the time, and you don't need 200 super for that, although if you do have that, you get a higher timer on well to 40 seconds. That's not really mandatory though, so most of the time, you want to have 100 super, just for the maximum cooldown, then crank your weapon stat, and then crank your grenade stat. Ideally, grenade is for, like, healing grenade, or maybe you want to have a damage grenade, so you just crank that as well. Before continuing, let's keep in mind that there's going to be not swap on in the raid. If you don't know what not swap is, essentially, they're trying to make it so you don't start loadout swapping in between encounters. It kind of, sort of works, but there's also a loophole around it, so you can't swap any stat mods. For example, if you have 110 super and you swap armor and your stat goes to 100, then that counts as swapping, and bang, the game is going to take away all of your ammo, all of your energy and super, and then all the ammo bricks on the ground. All are going to go poof and go away. So you're going to have to avoid that, and you're not going to be able to swap between 2 different builds in an encounter. So like a roaming build for killing ads, and then going into a super build for DPS. So this means you're very limited to what you can use. You can only have maybe 1 or 2 things you're doing per boss in each encounter. With that in mind, I've basically narrowed it down to 2 different builds with 2 variants to them on Titan. This is going to be a PK Titan setup, and then a Curse of the Falling Star setup. The PK setup is pretty straightforward. You're going to be running an SMG, in this case, the Antidate SMG, by far the best choice in the game, with PKs to get maximum amount of supers during a boss encounter because of how much super you generate between that and the other weapons we're using. So for our kinetic slot, the top slot, spoiler alert, this is going to be the same weapon on every class, and that is going to be Mint Retrograde. I don't think we need to say much about Mint. It does literally everything you could possibly ask for in this game. It is incredibly busted, the best legendary weapon currently in the game by a mile, and that's why we have it in the top slot. As I already mentioned, I have Antidate in my second slot for the PK setup for SMG damage on bosses and getting my super back very quickly. Lastly, we have the heavy slot. This is going to be Finality's Augur. This goes hand in hand with our SMG. We put up the Finality's Augur turret up top above a boss, and then mark it while we're shooting our SMG, and we build up large chunks of super over time very quickly. It's essentially free passive damage and free super energy while you're shooting your SMG. So here's the 2 things to keep in mind with this build. 1, you have the choice of either arc PKs, so you can have bolt charge barricades up with Storm's Keep, or you go the prismatic route to have prismatic to give you bonus damage for your weapons when you pop Transcendence. The second thing to keep in mind is that while not swap stops you from swapping stat mods and different armor, it won't stop you from swapping the other armor mods in your slots. So you avoid the stat one, but you can swap, let's say, for example, your scav mods to surge mods. So simply put, I will have 2 builds here where I'll have 1 PK setup, which is going to be roaming. This is going to have scav mods, it's going to have recuperation, etc. Then, before damage starts for a boss, I will go to build 2, which will swap my mods to DPS stuff, which is going to be super fonts in my helmet, it's going to be surge mods in my boots, time dilation in your class item, etc. For the other Titan setup with Curse of the Falling Star, it's going to be similar to what we're doing with PKs, except we're swapping out the PKs for Curse, and then the SMG for a second energy weapon, so we're running double special. For this, I'm going with a rocket sidearm in the second slot until we get to the damage trace, so I'm using return memory for heal clip purposes, and then redirection, I guess, is also kind of handy. and then before damage, I'm going to swap to a fusion rifle. For your heavy, there's two options. It's going to be either Finality's Augur doing the exact same job, giving you chunks of super and giving you passive damage over time on a boss, or it's going to be Parasite. Both are very powerful, and you can make arguments for using both going into this epic raid. It also kind of just depends on what you're used to. For example, if you're not used to using Parasite, you're just going to keep blowing yourself up, whereas Finality's Augur is super easy. You just put it in the air and bang, free damage. So kind of up to player preference there. Next, let's talk about Hunter. So there's two exotics that you're going to bring into this raid, in my opinion, and that's going to be either Star Eater Scales or Lucky Pants. The Hunter's job is mainly just going to be either create 8 million orbs for your team, or for one boss encounter, in this case Iatros, you're going to be running Silk Strike. Goldie is just not a reliable option versus Iatros, as he has like the tiniest crit in the world, and he constantly moves around, and you're getting booped and all that, so Silk Strike is a good damage super to have on him. Additionally, you could also run a class item with Star Eater Scales and Renewal to give your teammates some Frost Armor with a Dust Field during damage before you pop your super for bonus DR. Master your weapons, like I mentioned, you're running Mint Retrograde in the top slot just like every other character. In your heavy slot, you're going to be using either Finality's Augur, Parasite, or Tractor Cannon, depending on your team setup and what you guys are using. For example, in Iatros, you could run Tractor Cannon and be the climber in the encounter, and then have you go Tractor on the boss for DPS, pop your super, he's debuffed, you're supering, blah blah blah, come out of super, Tractor Cannon, and then you end up using your Mint Retrograde for damage. In your energy slot, I recommend bringing two different primaries. One is going to be just an SMG. The recent Solstice one is a perfect example of it having something like Attrition Orbs or Heal Clip plus Chaos Reshaped. So you're just going to be having tons of orbs and then healing on top of a damage perk while you're clearing ads. The other primary is going to be a weapon I keep recommending to people to farm out, and that's going to be Agape. This is going to be your Lucky Pants setup with the perks of Weeble Rounds and Precision Instrument. This is going to give you some great damage with Lucky Pants and also give a ton of super energy to get your super, which in that case will give your teammates more orbs for their supers. And again, just like the Titan, you're going to want to have two different setups for each build. So you're going to have a roaming setup for Silk Strike, then a DPS build for Silk Strike that you swap to right before damage starts. And the same thing applies to the Goldie variant with Star Eaters or Lucky Pants. You have a roaming setup with Scavs and whatnot, and then a DPS setup with Fonts and Surges. Outside of Iatros, you're going to want to be on Prismatic Goldie to just generate 8 million orbs for your teammates, unless the new encounter that I'm just making up in my head is added and has some different type of mechanics where Goldie is not the ideal situation. Lastly, Warlocks. Now, I think Warlock is the most obvious and straightforward path when it comes to this raid, and, well, I mean, basically any raid. And, of course, that's going to be you are chained to Well of Radiance. There are two other paths you can go besides Well. I'll get to that in a second, but for Well, the main idea is going to be you running either Sanguine for maximum damage if you have multiple Warlocks in a fire team, or running Boots of the Assembler. Bungie recently fixed Boots of the Assembler finally, so now they do work properly, and this can provide a 35% damage buff to your teammates, so think like Lumina, but just built into your boots, so it's ideal to have these on if you're running Well. For other supers, you can use Song of Flame, specifically for Iatros to snap stun him in place so he doesn't move around too much, or, you know, murder somebody. And then the third super option is going to be just Threadling spam Needlestorm. Again, I'd love to show footage for this, but the damn servers are down. But essentially, it's a build where you utilize throwing all of your Threadlings and your Needlestorm at the boss and doing massive damage thanks to the current artifact setup with Strand and Threadlings. For the Strand Threadling setup specifically, I would recommend having a massive increase in your weapon stat as close to 200 as you can, 100 super to get your super back as fast as possible, or higher if you can, and then, if ideal, you can also get your grenade to somewhere from 70 to 100 too, as your Threadling grenade is part of this build. Weapon-wise, there's not a whole lot of change between the other two characters. Top slot, again, is going to be Mint Retrograde. Heavy slot is, again, going to be either Finalities, Parasite, or Tractor Cannon, as Warlocks are typically the debuffer in most situations, like, for example, running during the Hobgoblin DPS encounter. For your energy slot, bring a Rocket Sidearm, maybe an SMG as a primary just in case, and also a Trace Rifle. The Trace specifically is for things like the Hydra encounter, where you're probably going to be somebody that's shooting the eyes, as you want Titans and Hunters outside doing the crowd control, so Warlocks are typically inside shooting eyes. A Trace Rifle is just ideal for that. Same thing for, like, Koragos, where you might be one of the OBJ people, and you're going to be either marking a mine or shooting a mine, etc. a trace rifle is just ideal for that. Lastly, if my delusions are correct and we do get an extra encounter in the raid, you want to bring some backup weapons just in case. For example, maybe the next 5th boss is going to be a rocket-based setup where that's just the perfect situation. So you want to bring a Galahorn, or if you're not being the Galahorn person, you want to bring in probably Heathen's Vengeance, as the new Strand Rocket is banned, so you can't use that. Also, a sniper rifle would be good too in the event that you have something like Koragos, where you want to be stunning him with a sniper, but also that new boss might have a similar mechanic where you have to stun or just do precision damage. Choir of One and Lord of Wolves, of course, are also going to be some good mentions, as they're just, you know, super powerful, so you should bring them no matter what. And I think that covers pretty much everything, at least currently that we know of. So, again, apologies for not having proper visuals for this. The damn game is down, and I can't record anything, but hopefully this has given you an idea of what to use for the raid. As a final note, stay tuned for the Epic Raid guide. As soon as it's over, and it's, I don't know, not 18 hours, I will be making a guide for whatever changes are in the raid / new encounter, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. If you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or comment below as well. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Epic Raid as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.